Okay, I don't mean to leave y'all hanging. I left out one major thing. When dealing with the dragon, initially the dragon is the Ten Commandments itself. But hear me out. The Ten Commandments is full of murder and violence when written incorrectly. And anything you add to that, like adding anything to the revelation, will plague the user because they believe something that could be false. I was watching a man recently and he brought up the fact that if any of a man's words weren't true, then they're not a true prophet. And I liked that video. It was a good video because he's basically saying a bunch of stuff in the Bible isn't true or didn't come true, and people are still adhering to them like there's some type of major power. And I'm here to tell you that even if something is true, you could adhere with something, you could adhere to new knowledge, but you're to worship nothing for a reason. So why do the three horns become one? Because all 10 horns are the 10 commandments, so to speak, and the seven heads are the other seven commandments. And what ends up happening is the top 10 end up, three of them become one. So what they do with the 10 commandments is they put the name of a God on it, the first three. I am the Lord God. You shall not transgress God. Don't take God's name in vain. They become one, and no matter what is written, people then create this spirit of God could do anything. You hear people all the time ignore the scriptures and then fathom what Jesus and God can do constantly. And so that's the ideology of the three horns. The reason why goes from a dragon to a beast to a false prophet is because it's how religion transforms throughout time. Now, I could put different civilizations on the heads and do this and that and claim this and that. But essentially, it takes away from the true metaphor of what religion or any words or anything can do to a person. You can either become a dragon or a lamb with this knowledge. And those two ideologies are simply stating you could become an attacker or you can let it change your life and become peaceful. And so the ideology of Babylon sitting on this beast is there was a time period, they even call it the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. There was a time period when Babylon first attacked Judah and changed their entire system. They even wrote about it. And so there were four nations, major nations that attacked. And now, if you pay attention, there are four major sects of this religion: Judaism, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Islam. And so I don't like to place names on different things because those could be anything. I like to stay towards the actual metaphor. And when I say originally it was 616, but what's happening is a lot of times you'll hear my burden is light, I am the light, and different things like that. Because what happens is instead of following all those laws, and a lot of them are violent, you're essentially supposed to follow the basics. It's like the ideology of Indiana Jones when the people were looking for the most expensive chalice and poisoning themselves, versus him who grabbed the plain one and just drank out of it. And that was the key. And so these are just metaphors coming from who I am to try to help people rationalize what's happening. I try to get people to read my video descriptions and read that covenant that I wrote and think about it consciously and be aware of everything that oneself do. Because when I constantly use these I ams, I tell people they are not for me, though mine is. They are for everyone freely so that we can gain our voice again, but do it righteously. Because that's the whole point of that book. People striking people for those seven laws, right? The seven heads, and how it transforms throughout time, even in that book. If I were to be honest, an irony of all this is I would say one of the heads is Peter and one of the heads is Paul. I mean, horns on the false beast that rose out of the earth. Because even in that book, the main attraction was one man, but he was killed, and those two men took over and spoke for themselves. And they spoke like dragons, follow me or else, in the spirit of the Lord. When he came here, he was peaceful, according to that book, if we're going off of book report logic. And so it's ironic that a man named Josephus, who was the first pope who taught Rome, I would call him Cephas. And then even double ironic that a German man, throughout Eurasia started to spread Protestantism a long time later and never saw the Lord, so to speak. I call him Martin Luther or Paul, who wrote all those letters to the church. Did he not put a 95 thesis and spread it around? It's ironic how these things came to be. And even out of the four nations, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, it's ironic how that is, because that goes all the way back to Daniel. But the reason why it's not is because currently they are being invaded already. I think by the time those scriptures were written, according to carbon dating, Rome was already about to take Greece over, which means those four nations had already came. And another little Easter egg I talk about often is Zoroaster. There's actually two prophets named after him and their names combined. The book of Esther, and then you have the prophecy of Zerah. But also there's book of Esther, and I'd have to look back at the book. But Zoroaster, who I like to call Elijah, Elijah, that's funny, totally changed Persia and the Middle East. And the psychological logic that I use about Muhammad when dealing with the Pope after reading different scrolls and watching videos of people who was in the Vatican is that whole ideology of a single God came after the Pope and the Codex Sinaiticus, which influenced that man. He had connections to the Pope. That's why people don't like his life being recreated, because a portion of his life is being ministered to by the Pope, which is why they all share the same books. One more thing that upsets me, people like John Wycliffe and William Tyndale, who was translating Hebrew long before that, Elisha ben Yehuda and all this other stuff going on. That's where Martin Luther got his book, William Tyndale. He was a martyr. He was killed by the Pope fighting him. So was Jehohanan. He was killed by Rome. Nero and his Herod and other people, procurators and different people. That's where they get all these Juans and Johns and Ivans and Giovanni, all that name. They know where that name comes from. They were looking for Prester John in the Middle Ages and caused a lot of problems with. They were dealing with the Mongols, Ethiopia, and a bunch of other different nations. But even Moses, there was a man named Amos. I talk about him often in my videos, where they got all this lore about Moses and the Ten Commandments and all this other stuff. And he was bringing the Amun. It was all African culture and lore. So I try to teach people consistently about a lot of this stuff. A lot of times we go so micro within a Mandelbrot set that we forget to look out and take a look at the bigger picture and realize we're the entire set, if that makes sense.